Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Risk Control and Education. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses some potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rodgers with VFIS Risk Control and Education, and today we're discussing emergency response on divided highways. Joining me on the program today is Jake Hoover, and Jake is an education specialist in our VFIS Risk Control and Education department. Jake is joining us today to discuss some best practices when responding to calls on these types of roadways and to help keep your members safe. Jake, I want to thank you for joining me today, and I really appreciate your time.
It's good to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to see you again. So what are the most significant hazards we see on divided highways in regards to our fleet units?
Well, I guess, we see a lot of things out there now, but probably the most important thing we're dealing with right now is us on the fire scene with our apparatus or our vehicles getting struck by other vehicles, the civilian drivers that are on the roadways trying to operate around us while we're out there doing what we do in everyday life.
So how has this trend that we've obviously seen happen way too much, how has this trend impacted the cause of injuries or fatalities for our service personnel that might be working on those roadways?
Well, to be honest, as I travel the nation and talk to different people and actually teach, one of the things that I do is ask in class, has anybody been out in the roadways when their vehicle has been struck and or hit or know somebody's been hit? And what I'm noticing is the significance of hands going up in the room. And you don't have to go too far to verify that. I recently just looked at the NFPA survey, and typical stuff at the top of the list is the overexertion and the strain, the crashes, and all that stuff. But when you look right below there, number 4 now is it's struck by, people getting struck by on incidents while we're operating out on these roadways, and it's 10% of our people now for when we're looking at fatalities. So pretty significant and definitely an increase.
So we talked about in the opening that we were going to be discussing divided roadways. You just mentioned that 10% of the fatalities, injuries are occurring on these roadways. Oftentimes we have to get to a scene that might be on the other side of the way that we're traveling. So should we even use turnarounds on high-speed roadways to access the opposite lane of traffic, or what do you think the best practice is in that regard? That's
actually a good question. And I've taken a lot of time over the last year or so to really delve into this. Some of it's personal, because I've been struck. I know personal friends have been struck out there. And one of the things that I've come across is this thing called Green Book out there. And what that is for your listeners is it's architectural roadway design on how they design the roadways. And one of the things we talk about in class, we talk about deceleration and how long it takes at like 55 or 65 miles an hour. You need 1,000 feet and all that kind of stuff. But what people don't understand is when you look at roadway design, the same stopping time is almost exactly equal to the same amount of time it takes to accelerate. So let me put this in context. If you merge into a lane onto a highway, for example, so your listeners can understand, it's expected you probably do about 25 miles an hour. And then at some point over the next 700, and I think it's 60 feet by Green Book, you're supposed to be up to acceleration speed. And let's face it, a lot of our highways are 65 plus now. So if you would do that from a stop, you need about 1,000 feet. So there's your equivalent. So think about on these high-speed roadways, whether it's a highway or just a high-speed roadway where you might have 2 lanes on each side and you're trying to make a U-turn, for example, and you're reinserting yourself into traffic. So imagine trying to reinsert yourself into traffic at 60, when they're going 65 miles an hour and you're turning in front of them, but you don't have a merge lane to actually to merge into traffic, gain speed properly and all that. So this is where it becomes the problem. And there's actually, there's plenty of documentation out there where people have done this. You don't have to go too far from seeing social media these days. And you can't expect these tractor trailer or civilian cars to stop in a timely fashion, nor can you expect our heavy apparatus specifically. Not only can't they accelerate in a timely fashion, the other issue is they usually use more than one lane. So even if you're on a 4-lane roadway, high-speed roadway, what it is, and when you turn, you're going to turn into both lanes. And that's actually been video documented. So these cause a lot of problems, a lot of near misses, and also even fatalities and injuries when we get struck. And it's not really on the civilians because they can only stop and do what they want to do. And then the other side of that is, not to belabor this, but to make sure people understand, when you put more traffic on the road, you just can create that entire risk to go up significantly. And I want you to think of it just from the standpoint of move-over laws. Move-over laws in most states, they tell you to pull over and get out of the way the next lane over, but they say if you can't, then you're supposed to stay in the lane and slow down. So if you have a ton of traffic on there and you're already in the one lane, almost two, you're basically stopping traffic at 65. And if there's a lot of traffic, there will be a collision. It's almost inevitable.
Absolutely. So what can we do to reduce the impact to our vehicles while operating on the highways? Because apparatus they're harder to get. They're more expensive to get than they've ever been, and even to get them repaired is a long timeline, and a service tech hour is higher than it's ever been. So keeping these things working on the roadways is obviously the goal. So what can we do to try to reduce that impact?
Yeah, two thoughts there. One is, if you're going to turn around on a roadway, I would highly suggest if it's high speed. So anything 55 or above for sure. You need to consider a couple options. If it's a true highway or something like, consider going to the next exit and turn around. I know that's not plausible everywhere in the United States, but if you're going to make that turnaround, you better be very, very careful about what you're doing. And just understand that you're putting a lot of risk out there. If it's a regular roadway, still high speed, consider going around the block, going down to the next light and making that turn, because you can actually do a better job probably just keeping your apparatus moving than if you would and you're trying to clear every single lane and watching out for people flying. You don't cause the accident that way. People can actually anticipate what you're doing. And then the other side of that is, what are we doing out in the roadways when we're operating on the scene of an incident, right? Because that's where we're getting in trouble and people are running into us also there. And, the big thing here is about safety. And for the longest time, we've always picked the most biggest, robust, vehicle out there that we own to block traffic. And that could be like a ladder truck. But, the ladder trucks, everybody knows in the market right now, replacing apparatus in general is extremely expensive. It's taking a long time to get this stuff ordered and back. And then, so you take your ladder truck, for example, which seems like a good idea, and you block the entire roadway. And now you just got your ladder truck cream. Well, you might only have one. So now you just took your whole service out for your community, or you lessened service to your civilians at this point. So, could we, instead of running our biggest apparatus like that, I get we want to protect our people, but at the same time, the engine company is more incapable of doing that. Do you have alternatives? Your state highway partners, right? They have roadway workers that bring stuff out and help control these traffic zones for us and their equipment. Does the fire department have accessibility to utility vehicle styles or, other vehicles that, let's face it, if a utility vehicle, if it gets struck, right, it's a whole lot cheaper to place. It doesn't mean you don't have your engine up further protecting in line. It just simply means that you have something that's a little bit more ease the burden on everybody if it does get struck.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's some departments that have the luxury of having a blocker unit, or they have attenuators, which attenuators, they can be repaired if with that crumple factor if it doesn't get too far up into the attenuator. So not everyone has that luxury, but it is a good way to go, because it, as you said, it reduces the loss of a frontline unit. So can you speak to attenuators and how they play a role in protecting the fleet?
Yeah, a lot of departments are using, old style vehicles. If they do have it, or retrofitting maybe that old pumper that, it's 20 years old, you were going to get rid of it. And then it's just a driver owner that brings it out. It creates that whole blocking scenario. So very, very helpful. And again, for those departments that don't have it, then, working with your state highway, your local officials, those kind of things, maybe your police departments to help in that process. Fully understand if you don't have that, but definitely a benefit if you do.
Yeah, that repairability factor and the fact that it's not taking out a frontline unit. It's definitely a luxury that not every department has, but if you can go down that road, it's certainly one that we encourage. Jake, I want to ask you, not every call is going to be on a perfect sunny day with perfect weather and all conditions lining up to be ideal. Can you speak to a response when it might be inclement weather or maybe responding at night?
Yeah, so the one thing I would add to that is first and foremost is don't forget your basics, right? Plenty of cones downstream. Consider how the length of your zone is so people do have to respond. So especially on high speed roadways, make sure your pumps are away so you're protecting your people. Watch out for those pinch points out there while you're on the roadway so people aren't getting struck or pinched between the cars and those cones. But more importantly, sometimes, for example, middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, we don't have a lot of traffic on highways, generally speaking, unless something's going on. So how do you slow those roadways down? So normally the mantra is we take a lane plus one. So in this case, consider actually expanding your lanes out, right? And if I had to guess, if you think back to anybody that's been in a situation, you can shut 2 lanes down and maybe there's 2 more lanes adjacent to you, and you can watch people go by at 2 o'clock in the morning and they're still doing highway speed. So how do you do that? You just have to increase your lane coverage. So, it's already wet outside, it's dark, visibility, those kind of things. So think about expanding it actually to control your traffic and slow it down even more and to give yourself a little bit more protection. At that point, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to hamper traffic. It's all about you being safe, not getting struck, and of course, your apparatus too. So think about that. Think about maybe taking your cones and angling them in a certain way where it makes the driver more responsive. So it's, just not a flat, smooth area. So they have to think about stuff like I have to negotiate the car a little bit. That helps, again, slow down people when they drive. And if you think about in the context of any long roads in the United States, a lot of the new highway people, they put angles and they offset them on purpose because people just kind of zone out. So it's kind of the same idea. What can I do to slow that traffic down, when they're going super highway speeds at 2 o'clock in the morning and you have multiple lanes operating still outside of your just 2 lanes that you would normally cover. So just some food for thought there.
Well, Jake, it was a pleasure talking with you about this topic today. It was a short and sweet one, but I appreciate your information and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you for listening to the program and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guest, Jake Hoover, once again for his time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing VFIS Risk Control at VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.